Something is Off About the Video Rental Store in My Town by Everblack Death Mask. Let me just start out by saying that I love horror movies. I have fond memories of staying up late on weekends as a teenager, curled up with a blanket and a massive bowl of popcorn, completely captivated by what I was seeing on screen. The practical effects, the gore, the score, all of it was enough to make me a junkie for life. Back in the day, I hunted for my next fix at the local video rental store every Friday night after school. It was called Dead End Video, and it was my home away from home, complete with shitty lighting, incredible selections of candy, and shelves stacked to the ceiling, wall to wall with VHS tapes and DVDs. Sadly, though, the world ended up moving on from Dead End Video. What was once a sanctuary for my younger self eventually became a vape shop. In the years since that place went out of business, I grew up, fell in love, fell out of it just as fast, worked a soul-sucking career path, and then eventually moved back here for a fresh start. That's the gist of what I told people. In reality, though, I was just spinning my wheels and stubbornly stuck in the past. Funnily enough, though, that's probably why the new video store even caught my eye in the first place. The shop itself was tucked between a now vacant donut shop and an H&R Block. The knife-shaped sign lit up with bright red neon. Final Cut Video. I thought it was a joke at first, because who in their right mind decides to open a video rental store in the year 2025? The windows to the place were tinted dark, and a sandwich board out front said, "Now open, horror movies only. We've got what you're dying to see." "We'll see about that," I muttered as I walked towards the door. I've always been kind of a purist when it comes to the horror genre. While everyone else moved on to streaming, I stuck with VHS. Something about the tracking lines, the warped colors, and the grain, despite all their faults, made the experience much more authentic. Watching film on tape is like seeing the images decay in real time. It delivers a grimy feel that other mediums don't. Over the years, I'd built up quite the collection. Rare slashers, obscure foreign titles, the kind of stuff that never made it to DVD. I used to trade with other collectors through various online groups back during the Wild West days of the internet. I was chasing down anything labeled unrated, uncut, or banned. Not for the shock value, but for finding the truth in the horror that felt too raw to be fake. Final Cut Video's interior looked like any horror fanatic's wet dream. The place had that movie popcorn aroma that hung in the air, and the shelves were littered with rows of classics and cult favorites sorted by subgenre: slasher, supernatural, creature features, psychological, found footage, etc. Sleepaway Camp, 1408, and Wreck were just some of the titles I saw as my eyes wandered around, taking in everything. Hell, there were even the odd bootlegs with photocopied cover arts among the more mainstream titles. The walls were adorned with movie posters I recognized, such as Jaws, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shining, Tombs of the Blind Dead, and Let's Scare Jessica to Death. But there were also posters that looked like they were printed for straight-to-VHS titles. The images on them were off-center and very grainy. They didn't have any zinger taglines either, just names like The Barbaric cruelties of the necro-cannibal, a slaughterhouse by the cemetery, and 3 on a meat hook. As I wandered the aisles, I noticed a couple of other customers in the store. There was a man in a long trench coat that lingered near the foreign horror section. Whenever I glanced at him, he would straighten immediately and pretend to be engrossed by a VHS cover. I couldn't help but feel like his eyes hadn't actually moved from me as I passed him. A crouched woman flipped through a stack of bootlegs on the lower shelves nearby. She seemed absorbed in what she was doing, but every so often her gaze lingered on me before she returned to her task. Further down one of the aisles, there was a young teen in a white hoodie. He was leaned against one of the shelf racks, his eyes on the shining movie poster. Whenever I passed him, he shifted just enough for me to be in his line of sight again. I sauntered towards the counter where a tall and thin man with bleached blonde hair and an eyeball tattoo on his neck stood. He appeared to be in his mid-30s maybe, with an expression that rested between amused and blank. He wore a shirt with a faded image of the Child's Play 2 movie poster, and his Final Cut video name tag said, Fulci. "Evening," he said enthusiastically as I approached. "Is this your first time here?" "Yeah, I moved back here a while ago. I didn't think these kinds of places still existed, to be honest," I said as Fulci offered a short laugh. "We're specialty. We offer horror and horror only. The good, the bad, and the downright ugly." He let that hang in the air like it was waiting for a 90s sitcom laugh track to play. "Cool," I said, playing off that awkward pause in the conversation. "I'm curious to see what you all have." He smiled just slightly as he held up 2 tapes, Pieces and Poughkeepsie tapes. "Alright, pop quiz. One's genius, one's garbage. Let's see if you pick right." Trick question, they're both garbage. The difference is that one is brilliant garbage, I replied without hesitation. "Which one's the brilliant garbage, though?" "The Poughkeepsie tapes, duh." He reached below the counter and then suddenly emerged, holding up another set of tapes. "Okay. Night of the Living Dead or Zombie? Which one of these do you respect more?" Romero's is a classic that birthed the zombie subgenre as we know it, but Zombie is beautiful chaos with tasteful gore. I'll have to give it to Romero, although I do love Fulci's work immensely. He grinned with delight at my answer. "A respectable opinion. Hey Hooper, Roth, come up here, we got someone with taste." I turned to see 2 more clerks make their way towards the counter. The one whose tag said Roth was a short, stocky man with a buzz cut, and he wore a moth-eaten Iron Maiden Power Slave hoodie. The other clerk, who had been meticulously organizing a stack of unlabeled VHS tapes, was thin as a coat rack, with choppy, uneven bangs that looked like she cut them herself with a knife. Her oversized cardigan hung off her like it belonged to someone much larger. The name tag attached to her cardigan read, Hooper, the letters appearing faded like they'd been scrubbed clean too many times. Fulci cleared his throat. "Now let me ask you this. Which is the better Dario Argento film? Suspiria or Inferno?" Suspiria is the only correct answer here. Argento crafted something truly masterful with that movie. And while Inferno is interesting, it's stylistically a mess. Now that is bold, Fulci stated, as Hooper and Roth nodded their heads in agreement. Can I ask him a question? Roth chimed in, his eyes meeting Fulci's, who signaled he could. Okay, which do you prefer, Cannibal Holocaust or the Green Inferno? I hesitated, mulling my answer over before stating what I believed was my most accurate opinion. Cannibal Holocaust. It's wrong in a lot of ways, but it's authentic in its approach and presentation, I guess. The Green Inferno to me feels like it's trying too hard. Roth's eyes seemed to reflect slight disappointment, but he gave a respectful nod before Fulci let out a delighted whistle. Interesting. You're not scared off by the real stuff. That's good to know because not everyone can stomach that. Alright, I have one final question. What's the scariest movie you've ever seen, purely for what it did to you? I thought about it for a moment as Hooper's eyes lingered on me, studying me. It has to be The Thing, hands down. It's not just the practical effects of the creature, but the paranoia, the isolation, the creeping dread, and the way it makes you doubt everything around you. He leaned back with a satisfied smirk, letting a pause stretch uncomfortably. Good. I think that tells me everything I need to know. You appreciate horror and see it for something beyond entertainment. You see it as an experience. You chase the raw, the obscure, the forbidden, and everything in between. He leaned closer, his elbows now on the counter, lowering his voice like we were about to talk about something illegal. You're not like the others who come in here who just want to scream at jump scares. You chase the more extreme. Am I right? I gave a polite laugh, already writing him off as a guy who took his job too seriously. Still, there was something about Fulci. It wasn't that he was creepy, just that his demeanor resembled that of a doctor trying not to startle a patient before a diagnosis. I shrugged, unsure how to answer. I guess I like what most people wouldn't bother with. He tapped a finger against the counter, his grin sharpening. You seem like someone who strays away from the norm. You prefer the kind of horror that twists your mind, or the kind of horror that leaves you unsettled long after the credits roll. I mostly prefer the ones that do manage to get under your skin. I'm a fan of the more psychological stuff, but I'm not one to shy away from gore as long as it serves a purpose. I admitted, not sure of where exactly the series of questions was headed. And the people on screen. Do you pity and sympathize with them? Or do you like to watch and see what humans are truly capable of? I don't know, honestly. I just watch the film and I try to understand what the director is trying to convey with their filmmaking. It's not like I'd ever act out what I'm viewing myself. But that's where the fun begins. His eyes glinted in the dim light. The thought experiment of putting yourself in the victim's place, or maybe even being the one doing the less savory acts, is fun to think about. Most people flinch at the idea. I don't think you do. You seem to use your imagination, and that tells me a lot about you. I'm not sure I want to know which role you find yourself thinking about more, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. If it makes you feel any better, it's 50-50. Fulci chuckled. As he leaned back, his gaze swept the store. Now, how far would you go for the perfect horror experience that doesn't pretend? For a story that feels real? I don't know. I like scary movies that know what they are. Not like real-life horror, if that's what you're getting at. The line between fiction and reality is thinner than most think, Fulci said softly, almost contemplatively. Some chase the monsters on the screen, while others pursue the truth that makes the monsters. So, are you going to show me some movies or what? This is starting to weird me the hell out. My intrusive thoughts blurted out of my mouth. Fulci squinted his eyes, seemingly not liking the fact that I interrupted what he was saying. What I'm about to show you is something we don't normally show off to customers. He tapped the counter twice and waved a hand toward the back room. Roth walked back that way without a word. Hooper hadn't moved, but she was watching me intently, like she was waiting to see how I responded to what Fulci had said. We've got a private collection, Fulci continued. Stuff that's not on the shelves. They have no cover artwork or credits on IMDb. Technically, these are films that don't officially exist. You won't find these in any collector group either, Hooper chimed in. Her tone made her words seem like a dare. I raised a skeptical eyebrow. Are you talking about bootlegs? What the hell do you have back there, an original work print of Begotten? Sure. Bootlegs. That's what we'll go with. Roth reappeared from the back room with maybe a dozen battered, black clamshell cases and set them on the counter. There was no art on any of the VHS tape covers. Every single one of them were unmarked and unlabeled. Some appeared scratched. Some had melted edges near the spool. And one was even crudely taped back together, like it had exploded in a VCR and someone had reassembled it out of spite. What they all had in common were white stickers in the middle of the tape with messy, handwritten text such as, "Until you see the eyes," "Jeremy Vane was already in the trunk," and "The victims carved in the bark." Fulci grabbed a couple of them and held them carefully, like he was handling bombs instead of tapes. These tapes are priceless pieces of the Final Cut collection. Fulci spoke reverently. Each of these is a one of one. There are no copies. These are one of a kind in many ways. They don't end when they're over. Cute line. I smirked as Hooper leaned in from her spot. No, he's serious. She held my gaze for a beat too long, then turned away. I nodded and continued to look over the assortment of tapes on the counter. My eyes quickly settled on a plastic casing that looked like it had been left in the sun for too long. Someone had scratched a title into the edge with what looked like a needle. The Incident in Summerbrook Forest. "What's this one?" I asked as I picked it up to study it. Fulci paused before answering. That one's a tough watch, to say the least. It's one that most have said is too visceral for them. They didn't have the stomach to make it all the way through." "Y'all are acting like this is the tape from The Ring," I quipped. "But it came out dry." "But I don't mind a challenge. Is it cursed or something?" "Cursed is just a marketing term. The more apt description would be documentary adjacent. It's also Roth's favorite." "Seriously?" I asked Roth. He just nodded once and then stared at me like an NPC. I turned to Hooper. "You can take it," she spoke quietly. "But you have to watch it all the way through." "All right, I'm sold. This will be tonight's movie," I said, deciding my rental right then and there. Hooper and Roth exchanged a glance and smiled like they'd just won a bet. Fulci rang me up at the register with an old, dusty cash drawer that clinked when it opened. He placed the tape gently in a wrinkled brown paper bag with no branding on it. As he handed the bag over, his fingers lingered for a second too long on mine. "Just remember, someone bled to make every one of these." I forced an awkward smile. "Right. I'll bring it back tomorrow." I said goodbye to the 3 clerks and stepped out into the night a minute later with a paper bag tucked under my arm. I didn't look back as I got in my car and made the drive home. Later that evening, I ordered Papa John's, grabbed a cold can of Dr. Pepper from my fridge, and popped the tape into the cheap combo VCR TV. I kept it around for nostalgia's sake. The VCR wheezed like an old smoker on its 5th pack of cigarettes for the day, as the movie whirred to life on the screen. The first thing I noticed was the 70s grindhouse aesthetic of the film. It started without any credits, instead focusing on a handheld establishing shot of 6 teenagers drinking beers and laughing around a campfire. There was no music to be had, and the only lighting came from the natural light of the fire that crackled in the darkness. It felt like I was watching someone's home video that was left in a storage container somewhere. The voices of the teenagers were barely discernible. I couldn't really make out anything they were saying. One of them kept looking off into the trees in the direction of the camera, like they had heard something. It was uncanny viewing, but other than that, it seemed like a setup for your typical slasher flick. I wondered when the actual movie would start, as for the first 10 minutes or so, it was just the shaky camera stalking the teenagers from the tree line. Heavy breathing and quiet snickering could be heard from behind the camera, as one of the girls strayed away from the group. I think she said she had to go pee behind a tree or something. The camera followed her from afar, the leaves crunching and branches cracking beneath the camera wielder's feet. As the camera person got closer to the girl, I could hear a knife being unsheathed. The girl was tackled to the forest floor, causing the camera to fall to the ground. A large man overpowered her and plunged a knife deep into her throat. She didn't die right away. You could hear the labored wheezing coming from her throat as she tried to push the man off her, blood gushing from her wound. The camera didn't flinch as she choked on her blood, her limbs going limp. This didn't feel staged by a scream queen or a stuntman. This felt real. I pressed the pause button on the VCR and sat there for a while, staring at the warped image frozen on the screen. I couldn't decide if it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen, or simply the most convincing horror film ever made. My brain kept trying to rationalize everything by saying, it's just underground filmmaking. Some people with a handheld camera and a knack for shock value. Eventually, I laughed it off and told myself that I was being overdramatic. I'd seen worse, right? It was just a movie. Nothing more than harmless fun. That's what I kept repeating as I pressed play again. I watched as the scene changed to show the rest of the group had been tied up around the campfire. Their wrists were bound with duct tape and they had burlap sacks pulled tightly over their heads. Their movements were sluggish. The muffled sobs under the fabric were picked up faintly by the cameras as it was set down on the ground. I could hear the sound of the lens cap being unscrewed as someone was approached. A shadow moved almost out of frame. It was the cameraman's hand passing a handgun to someone off screen. Which one of your friends is first? You could hear the smile in the voice that asked. The person holding the gun had finally stepped into view, their features half lit by the dying campfire. He looked familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. His breathing was loud and unsteady, clearly panicking at what he was about to do. He looked around at the figures surrounding the fire, pointed the trembling hand with a gun at one of them, and fired. Pop! The first shot echoed like a firecracker in the night. The head snapped back and the body slumped sideways, collapsing to the ground. The next two shots came much quicker and with less hesitation. Pop, pop. Each of the burlap sacks turned dark at the top as blood poured through in slow, syrupy streams that dripped down into the dirt. The camera didn't flinch at the horrific act that had been committed, and no dramatic music or clever editing tricks changed what I had seen. The wind rustled the leaves in the nearby trees as laughter filled the air. Then, with no credits to signal the end, the tape clicked, and I heard the noise of hissing static overtake my TV. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to feel about what I saw. I ejected the tape, but just sat there, holding it in my hand. I told myself that it was ridiculous to feel the way I did, but I couldn't help but feel unnerved. What kind of movie was this? I asked myself repeatedly as I turned off the TV, put the tape back into its case, and went to bed. I tossed and turned in bed, telling myself that the movie was just a really well-done underground film. It had to be one of those weird Eastern European things that never made it out of tape trading circles. That's what I wanted to believe, but a part of me didn't know what to believe exactly. I was just starting to drift off when I heard the quiet rustle of footsteps outside. I got up, pulled the curtains aside, and I felt my skin shudder. From my window, I could see maybe a dozen people just standing in the street, standing completely stationary as they watched my house. I couldn't make out any of their faces, but they all appeared to be wearing the same set of dark clothes. Their heads were tilted towards my window like they were directly staring right at me. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. But then one of them slowly raised a hand and pointed straight at my window. I stumbled back from the window, scared out of my mind by what I was seeing. When I went to go look out my window again, though, they were gone, and the street was completely empty. I got out of bed, walked towards the front door, and opened it, half expecting to catch some pranksters running away into the night. But no one was there. It was completely quiet outside except for the sound of faint whispers coming from somewhere nearby. I could hear numerous voices, all repeating the same words like some kind of ritualistic incantation. Did you watch it? Did you watch it? The voices swelled to a chaotic crescendo as the crunch of gravel signaled approaching footsteps. I slammed the door shut and locked it, double-checking and triple-checking that it was locked before I turned off every light in the house. I backed away from the door, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then, I heard knocking. It started off as a soft tap, 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 before it gradually became a furious pounding of fists against the door. Did you watch it? The voices were right outside my door now, overlapping with each other to create a maddening chant. I could hear something that sounded like fingernails scrape against the doorframe amidst all the voices. Under the crack in the doorframe, I could see shadows moving and twitching in a frenzy. I backed toward the hallway, the doorknob rattling aggressively as I ran into my room and grabbed a baseball bat. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, brandishing the bat, trying to look intimidating. The only reply was a single whisper pressed right up against the front door. "Did you watch it?" Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. The doorknob had finally stopped jerking, and it felt like the world was holding its breath. I stood there for what felt like an hour, listening for any sort of footsteps or whispers, before I dared to peek through the peephole. I didn't see anybody, and the street seemed to be empty again. I went to the living room and sat on the couch with the bat in my lap, fully intending on waiting for the sun to rise. At 3:13 a.m., my phone buzzed on the table. I had forgotten I had left it out here. I was getting a call from an unknown number. I answered the phone to hear a familiar voice. "Did you watch it?" "Fulci? Is this you? How the hell did you get my number? What are you doing calling me at this time of night?" You already know why I'm calling. Yes, I watched it. Just what is going on? I feel like I'm losing my damn mind and I need some answers. There's more where that came from. I'll be talking to you later. Then the line went dead. Immediately after, I began typing this up because I had to explain my story to someone. What do I do? I'm really weirded out by all of this. Maybe I've seen too many horror movies, but I can't help but feel like something strange is going on. I think I'm going to investigate this further. I have a feeling there's more to this video store than what's on the surface. I'll continue to make updates with what I find. I discovered something dangerous about the video rental store in town, and I'm in serious need of help. Part 2. Before I get into what happened next, if you haven't seen my post about the first tape I watched from Final Cut Video, you might want to read that. It'll help you understand everything that's happened up to this point. I told myself I'd return the tape and be done with it, but I couldn't shake what I'd seen on the film and in real life. The entirety of last night played on a loop, from the tape's final scene to the silent crowd standing outside my house. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, those gruesome images gnawed at me. My thoughts churned with a question I didn't have an answer to. Who were those people? And what did they want from me? I couldn't just sit at home pretending it hadn't happened. The unease had become unbearable. I needed to see them again, to understand if what I'd witnessed was real. After work earlier tonight, I drove back to Final Cut Video. I thought about the phone call from the night before with Fulci and the way his voice had been unnervingly calm about everything. A part of me wanted to storm behind the counter and demand answers, but I knew that wouldn't get me anywhere besides a jail cell with charges pressed against me. I wanted desperately to know why he called, but I knew deep down I'd have to approach this another way. I listened to the voice of reason inside me that advised against going in guns blazing. I couldn't risk revealing that I was coming back to get another tape to investigate, not when every fiber of my being screamed that everything about this place wasn't exactly ordinary. I took a deep breath, shoved the questions back into the deepest corners of my mind, and pushed the door open with a casualness that I didn't feel. When I walked in, I did my best to pretend like all I had come in for was another rental. I noticed Hooper and Roth were nowhere to be found. In fact, the store was completely empty, minus Fulci, who greeted me from behind the counter while he organized a small pile of tapes. "Hey, friend," he spoke with a knowing smile. "Did you watch it?" His words made me slightly wince due to last night's experience. "Yeah?" I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. "You weren't kidding. It was a rough watch. It took me a bit to actually get through it." "Rough's just another word for real." His eyes twinkled with curiosity as I handed him the tape to return. Was that found footage or like a recreation or what? It seemed pretty real. I tried to sound calm, but Fulci probably saw right through me. He didn't answer my question. He just watched me for a moment as if deciding how much I was ready to hear. Then, without a word, he ducked behind the counter and retrieved a cardboard box full of more beat-up VHS tapes. One by one, he sifted through them, the reels clacking softly inside their cases, before he stopped and handed me one he decided upon. I think you will enjoy this one a lot. I've watched this one probably a handful of times now, and it gets better with every viewing. He handed me a VHS case that had no art, a single phrase scrawled in shaky black Sharpie on a mustard yellow sticker. Followed home, then killed. I nodded and stared at the tape in my hands, feeling like I was carrying something that wasn't meant to be viewed. Fulci didn't say anything. He just stood there watching me behind the counter with his hands folded, similar to how someone waits in line at a grocery store. Fulci didn't say anything. He just stood there watching me behind the counter with his hands folded, similar to how someone waits in line at a grocery store. I handed it back to Fulci, and a moment later, the brown paper bag he slid across the counter confirmed my rental, and I turned to leave. As I walked toward the door, I could feel his eyes on me the whole way, like he was waiting to see what my reaction would be. Despite him giving me the creeps, I maintained a calm demeanor as I got into my car and drove out of the parking lot. On the drive home, I couldn't help but notice a van following a few cars behind me in my rearview mirror. It was old and dented all to hell, with white paint reminiscent of dandruff flaking off both sides. I tried my best not to give it much thought until I turned onto my street, and it did the same. I knew not to panic. I had heard in the past that the best thing to do was to never go to your house, but drive to the police station. I decided to test the van behind me to see if it actually was following me. I turned left onto a random road in my neighborhood, and a moment later, the van did too. I turned right by the ice cream shop. It made the same right turn. Every movement I made, the van's headlights stayed locked behind me. I pressed the gas, speeding down a residential street to lose the van, but it sped up, determined not to lose me. I kept sneaking glances of the van in my rearview mirror as I drove towards the police station. The engine of the van roared as it surged forward, closing the distance and nailing my back bumper. Bang! The force of the impact caused my car to jolt violently forward, my head slamming down onto the steering wheel. Blood dripped slowly down my chin from the split bottom lip I had received from the impact. The taste of iron filled my mouth as I stomped on the gas, desperately trying to get out of the driver's sight. The van pursued me for maybe another 4 blocks, before it suddenly pulled off and vanished down a random side road. When I finally reached the police station, I threw my car in park and pulled my phone out to type the van's license plate in the notes of my phone. I sat there and pretended to check my phone afterwards, convinced the van would show up at any moment to finish what they started. Thankfully, it never came back. When the cold unease festering in my stomach decided to finally leave, I made the drive home. I decided I would take care of the damage at a later date. I felt calm enough to drive, but my eyes never left the rearview mirror the whole way home. My body was still shaking from adrenaline when I eventually pulled back into my driveway. I sat in the driver's seat for a long while before I finally worked up the nerve to finally go inside. I double-checked the locks and shut every curtain before sitting down to watch the next tape. I popped it into the VHS player and sat in front of the TV. Like last time, this movie began with no credits or music. It instead focused on a girl walking on a sidewalk at night. The person holding the camera was trailing behind at a considerable distance. He commented on how beautiful she looked and said, "She would be fun to play with," as she let herself inside. Strange choice of dialogue, I thought, as I watched the camera wielder hide behind some bushes outside the girl's house. The voyeuristic nature of the film was unsettling, and it only got stranger as the camera zoomed in on the girl through her bedroom window. She had her back turned, folding laundry under the glow of a bedside lamp. I couldn't shake the feeling I'd seen her before. The hair, the cardigan, it was also familiar. Then she turned around and made eye contact with the camera. The girl let out a terrified screech. It was Hooper. The camera lurched as Hooper's sharp screams pierced through the speakers, making me flinch in surprise. The man behind the camera didn't run or shout. He just whispered something I couldn't make out over the hiss of the tape. The footage went haywire after that, with the sound of doors slamming, hurried footsteps pounding through the house, and the camera shaking violently in pursuit. When the camera person caught up to Hooper, she begged for her life as a knife was pressed to her throat. Tears streamed from her face as the camera tilted, catching only fragments of the struggle before the frame settled on her body being dragged across the hardwood floor by her hair. Then, the footage cut again, and the camera steadied as it focused on Hooper's living room. Her parents sat on the couch, arms and legs bound tightly with rope as the cameraman walked into frame. He was tall, but his face was hidden well within the shadows of the dark. In his right hand he held a hunting knife, and he pointed with his left, saying something to the camera operator off-screen. The sound was muffled and distorted by the grain, but it sounded like, "Get this part and goddammit make it clean this time." Then came a brief struggle that caught glimpses of thrashing limbs and furniture scraping against the floor in the struggle. The camera rocked back and forth before tumbling sideways, the man and woman crying out in desperation before both were silenced by the knife plunging deep into their throats. The living room was quiet, apart from the rhythmic sound of a knife plunging into flesh. The image of the tape began to bleed, the colors changing from a light red to a storm cloud gray, before abruptly cutting to static. I sat there, staring at the flickering screen long after it ended, waiting for something, anything, to tell me that what I'd seen had been staged. What the hell was Hooper doing in that film? I pressed rewind on the VHS player. The VCR whirred and clicked as the film rolled back, and as it did, I leaned closer to the screen. My heart pounded in my chest as I replayed the living room scene frame by frame, studying every last blurry detail. My heart pounded in my chest as I replayed the living room scene frame by frame, studying every last blurry detail. I did this maybe 24 times before I finally saw something that stood out to me. I froze the frame and stared. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but the camera doesn't lie. It was a quick flash of skin on the knife wielder's neck as he leaned forward to adjust the camera. I could see a circular shape in black ink. It was an eyeball tattoo. My blood turned to ice as the realization settled in. Fulci. For the next hour, I combed through the film again, desperate to disprove what I had just seen. Maybe it was a recreation of some kind. A weird ARG, or an experimental film. I told myself anything to make the reality feel like fiction. The more I analyzed, the more undeniable it felt that I had stumbled onto something more than I had bargained for. I'm not sure how long I went over the footage, but eventually, I switched off the TV and pulled out my laptop. My hands shook as I typed Final Cut Video into the Google search bar, but nothing popped up. I couldn't find any listings, website, or business registrations tied to that name. I decided to try different name variations to see what results I could find. I typed in Fulci Video Store, Final Cut Clerk, even Hooper Followed Home Then Killed movie. Still nothing. Every result of mine led to a dead end. Fulci had been right. I wasn't going to find these on IMDb or the internet. I thought back to the first tape I had viewed, the incident in Summerbrook Forest, and discovered that there had been a mass murder in an area of the same name over in Wisconsin about 7 years ago. I pulled up news articles and forum posts from years past, scrolling through the grainy photographs and police statements. Most of the coverage was vague and full of conjecture about a camping trip turned, quote, ritualistic annihilation, unquote. But as I dug deeper, I noticed something. According to the reports, only one of the bodies had never been discovered. Despite the reward for any information leading to their discovery, they were never to be seen again. My stomach twisted at the missing persons picture that was provided of the teenager who had vanished that night. He was presumed dead, but I knew he was alive because I saw him last night. It was Roth. The more I stared at his photo, the colder I felt, like I had found a piece to a puzzle that I wasn't sure I wanted to see completed. My phone buzzed on the table nearby. I checked the phone and didn't recognize the number, but a single video file had been sent. I tapped it open, and watched the grainy footage shot from outside my house in confusion. At first, I thought it was just someone walking past, but then the camera angle shifted, revealing the front door, the living room, and finally, me on my laptop. I felt myself grow rooted to the spot in fear as the lens slowly panned closer, tracking my every movement just as the tape I'd watched had tracked Hooper. I ran to the window, determined to see who had been filming me. In the shadow of the oak tree near my house, I could see 3 figures, each holding what looked like handheld cameras that were pointed directly towards my window. I closed the blind shut and pulled myself away from the window. I sat in silence and stared at the screen of my phone, dreading a notification from an unknown number that never came. As the evening went on, the feeling of paranoia persisted as I checked the front window and peeked outside the windows every few minutes. I didn't see anything out of place or anyone in my yard, but still, I was deathly anxious. I must have dozed off on the couch because the next thing I remember was bolting awake to the sound of glass exploding. A heavy object fell to the floor amid a hail of glass shards that rained upon me. Out of natural reflex, I ducked behind the couch, but my movement wasn't fast enough to prevent the tiny, bleeding cuts to open my skin. The stinging sensation from the glass burned across my arms and neck like a fire from their impact. I groaned in pain as I heard a loud mechanical thunk, like a car door shutting. I peeked up from behind the couch cautiously, feeling cold wind on my face. I walked towards the broken window and watched the van disappear around a street corner down the block. It was the same one that had followed me earlier. I turned my attention to the carpet and saw a black VHS case that was taped to a brick. Written in thick red marker on a white label with yesterday's date, 10/26. I went against my better judgment and put the tape in the VCR. The screen morphed from black to static to a faded in shot of the interior of my house. I shivered as the camera panned slowly through the living room. I realized everything matched exactly the way I had it now. The blanket half folded on the couch, the empty Dr. Pepper cans I'd left next to the sink, the various pieces of junk mail sitting in their envelopes, resting on the table. The footage moved down the hallway before it cut to my bedroom, the camera POV hovering in the doorway. I could see myself asleep on the bed. The breathing on the audio grew heavier as it synced with the faint rise and fall of my own chest beneath the sheets. For a moment, the frame held perfectly still and focused. But then, without warning, the camera moved closer. So close, in fact, that the camera was practically pressed up against my face. Before anything else could happen, the film cut to black. The TV screen glowed gray in the dark, and my pale, wide-eyed reflection stared back at me in disbelief at what I had witnessed. By the time I eventually crawled back into bed, the sky was turning gray, signaling the beginning of a new day. I didn't bother setting an alarm because there wasn't a chance in hell I was going to sleep anyway. When I opened the door to go to work this morning, I was expecting maybe a newspaper or a package to be on my doorstep. Instead, there was a single fresh video rental receipt from Final Cut Video. This one didn't have my name on it, but what it did have was tomorrow's date and a note. Will you join us? I'm completely on my own on this one, and I'm in desperate need of help. I'm in possession of an alleged snuff film? That's a federal crime, and my ass will be in jail in no time if they saw a single frame of what I have in my possession. I can't go to the cops, but doing nothing isn't an option either. The people running this store, I think they're sick people who get off on showing this stuff to people. If I'm right about what's happening, this might be the last time that I post. I'll provide updates when I can, but I fully intend on going back to the store to return this tape and put an end to this. The video store in town has a terrible secret, and I'm going to expose it. Finale, Part 3. For any of this to make sense, you will need to read the 2 previous posts I made. I will link them in order, so click here first and then this one second. I fully intended to go to the police after making my last post. I really did. When I woke up this morning, I told myself I was done with it all, and that I'd hand over the tape, explain everything, and finally let someone else deal with whatever the hell was happening at Final Cut Video. But when I walked out to my car after work, I saw that it had been broken into. The driver's side door was hanging wide open, and the glove compartment was torn apart. Papers and miscellaneous junk were strewn everywhere. The seats were slashed with giant gashes, foam spilling across the floor. Whoever did this wasn't after money. They were searching for something. I put 2 and 2 together and realized that the people responsible were looking for the VHS tape. They were trying to cover their tracks. I raced home and discovered that my car hadn't been the only thing ransacked. My front door was cracked, the lock completely splintered from the force of the impact to break in. Various drawers had been opened and their contents dumped onto the floor. My wallet, my laptop, my TV, and everything else of value was still there. The only thing missing was the tape. The idea that they knew I was going to go to the police with it terrified me. They'd always been one step ahead of me, but not this time. I grabbed the baseball bat from my room and double-checked that I had my phone before getting back into my car. Confronting them as a collector or customer wasn't my intention. Instead, I was going in as someone who wanted the truth and would do anything to get it. They weren't going to stop me from getting that tape back. At around 5 p.m., I pulled into the parking lot of Final Cut Video. I had barely parked my car before I got out and stormed toward the entrance, bat in hand. I opened the door and rows of tapes in the new arrivals section seemed to glare at me. The aroma of old tape polish made me grimace, and the lightning reflected off the plastic cases in a way that made the tiles shimmer. With clammy hands, I wielded the bat and scanned my surroundings for the first signs of anything suspicious. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw the movement of something slipping between the aisles, but when I turned, there was nothing there. Maybe it was just my nerves, but my gut told me that they knew I was coming. Back for another film. I about jumped out of my skin. Fulci was standing mere inches away from me. No? Actually, I need answers. Now, I said, steadying my hands around the bat. His eyes narrowed and he smiled like he knew a secret that I didn't. Oh? What do you want to know? I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten. I know what happens in those tapes. Roth? He murdered those kids in the Summerbrook tape. And Hooper? Her family? You murdered them. His voice dropped an octave, but the amusement in his tone was unmistakable. I didn't murder anyone. I was creating art. Sometimes, sacrifices have to be made for your craft. For God's sake, these are people. This goes beyond making movies. I shouted, stepping further back into the aisle to make some distance. See? You're missing the point here. I'm giving them a new life and immortalizing them by doing this. Do you think they'd be remembered if they continued to live their boring little lives? How many people remember the names of the victims in serial killer cases? Now, how many memorable characters have we had in horror? These are more than just films. They are worship with better lighting. You're delusional, I stated bluntly. Taking the lives of others isn't art. You're not understanding, he screamed like a toddler having a meltdown. I was wrong about you. I thought you wanted to create, not just collect. You're not willing to give your life for this. You're not a true fan of horror. You brainwashed Roth into killing his friends. You killed Hooper's parents. You're a sick fuck, plain and simple. No, I am not. He laughed darkly as I pointed the bat at him. Enough of the cryptic bullshit. In a desperate attempt to strike him, I swung the bat. Before it could connect, though, I felt hands there, grasp, vice-like, grip my arms. Let me go! I shouted, as I writhed around in a vain attempt to wrench free from their ambush. I managed to get Roth in the shoulder with my elbow. It was hard enough that he grunted, but it didn't slow him down any. Both wrestled me deeper into the aisle, their combined weight pushing me against another nearby shelf. The shelves rattled as I thrashed and knocked into the surrounding displays, causing numerous VHS cases to spill onto the floor, clattering like dominoes. In the middle of the struggle, the bat was knocked from my grasp and skidded across the floor. Sending a punch to Roth's face was enough to make him stagger and fall back into one of the shelf racks, but before I could go to retrieve the bat, the sharp crack of wood exploded against my ribs, and the world briefly turned into darkness. I collapsed to the floor, breathing like a fish out of water, the air forced out of my lungs. Hooper handed the bat to Fulci. and he grabbed it with a casual smile before tossing it to the side. Tisk, tisk, tisk. He stepped over the mess of fallen tapes to stand in front of me. We'll have to clean this up later. Hooper, Roth, take our friend here to the back. I want to show him something. They didn't hesitate. They dragged me toward a nearby hallway, past an Attack of the Killer Tomatoes poster. My shoulder thudded against a wall as they turned a corner, causing me to groan in pain. The door to the staff-only room opened to reveal nothing but pitch black. Fulci flicked the lights on to reveal a room that didn't belong in any retail space. The floors were bare concrete, the walls lined with industrial shelving stacked high with black VHS tapes and unmarked DVDs. Each one had a white sticker, a number, and names. Hundreds of them. That's when I saw them. The dozen people that sat in a circle on the floor. There were men, women, even kids no older than 16, all adorned in dark clothing with their heads bowed, eyes closed. In front of each of them sat an open camcorder, red light blinking in unison with their breathing. It looked like they were in some kind of deep meditation, or they were praying to the machines in front of them. I recognized them all. They had been the people standing outside my house watching me. He walked between them all like a preacher at the pulpit. These, Fulci said, gesturing to the circle, are our faithful crew. Every scream, cut, and frame that you have seen, they helped capture. The camera is their sacrament, and the lens doesn't lie. He crouched beside one of the youngest, a boy with a shaved head and blood-stained fingertips, and adjusted the camera in front of him. They learn film, and most importantly, earn their names. Everyone starts as a viewer, a voyeur, but eventually, they all want to learn the behind-the-scenes stuff. He pointed toward the shelves. Every finished project of ours gets cataloged, and every creator joins the collection. Death might be eternal, but the art is immortal. The boy's eyelids fluttered as he whispered something that sounded like action. A low hum rippled through the group as they began to chant softly. Their bodies rocked gently in time with it. As I turned to look away, I noticed the pegboard on the far wall containing still shot, candid images and telephoto snapshots. They were victims, dozens of them, and they all looked terrified. My photo was among the many on the board, right in the center too. Someone had written in red marker underneath it, "Shoot in progress." With a smile, he followed my gaze. See, you've been part of it longer than you think. We've been filming since the moment you walked through that door. He walked over to one of the shelves and pulled out a VHS case. This one wasn't damaged or aged like the others, but glossy and professional, like it were brand new. He held it up and my heart plummeted. It was a perfect frame of me peeking through the blinds of my window, staring back from the cover. The Collector's Initiation. It's your big debut. His tone was malicious and playful at the same time. I didn't say anything. My throat was locked tight. Hooper's and Roth's fingers dug into my arms like handlers steadying an animal before the cut. Don't take it personally, Hooper cooed. Everybody gets nervous before their first scene. On the nearby table, Fulci set the tape down with a plastic click. Come on, let's get you in front of the camera. You've already been such a natural. The chanting of the crew had grown louder, their eyes opened and focused on me. Bursts of bright red strobed throughout the room as the red recording lights focused directly on me. My mind screamed for me to move, to do anything, but I was completely frozen to the spot. From the table, he picked up something small and metallic. It was a box cutter. Don't worry, Fulci said, flicking the blade out with a snap. We only ever need one good take. In that moment, fear compelled me to act. I drove my elbow backward, managing to catch Roth in the ribs. He hunched over in pain, his arms pulled away. Hooper shrieked as I twisted out of her grip. She reached for me in desperation, but I was already stumbling toward the door with Fulci in hot pursuit. Keep rolling, he screamed as I bolted into the hallway. Every step of mine caused me to feel excruciating pain where the bat had struck earlier. Breathing was difficult. Every gasp of air I took felt like knives slicing the insides of my lungs. At this point, I wasn't running so much as trying not to stop and fall forward. The chanting behind me morphed into psychotic laughter as the cult swarmed after me, footsteps thundering close by. I caught glimpses of the camcorders, the red lights bobbing like eyes in the darkness. Not daring to look back again, I ran as quickly as my feet could carry me. Don't run! Fulci's voice echoed from somewhere behind. We'll lose focus! I crashed through to the front room and stumbled into a shelf, sending a bunch of tapes clattering to the floor. One of them split open on impact, unspooling black ribbon across the floor. My heart hammered frantically, but I didn't stop. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I scrambled toward the front door. My fingers scraped against the edges of the shelves. My body screamed at me to run faster. Hooper and Roth's screams echoed off the walls of the store. I could hear the shuffle of dozens of others moving behind them. I flung myself through the glass doors out into the parking lot. The neon Final Cut Video sign above flickered overhead like a dying heartbeat. The cool breeze hit me like a slap to the face, and the cult poured out of the doorway behind me. With their cameras raised, they continued chasing after me like a pack of feral animals. Panic consumed my movement as I fumbled for my keys. I unlocked the car door and threw myself inside, just as a cultist's hand barely grazed my shoulder. I slammed the door shut as I watched them swarm the car with reckless abandon. The entire vehicle rocked back and forth with their weight as they shook my vehicle. Some punched the windshield, the force of the strikes causing cracks in the glass, while others struggled to pry open the locked doors. My breath came in anxious bursts as I jammed the key into the ignition and turned. A flurry of bloodied fists banged against the driver's side window as the engine roared to life. My tires squealed against the asphalt as I floored my foot on the gas pedal. The car shot forward and slingshotted several of them off the hood. The sickening thud of bodies against the ground blended with the screams of cult members as I barreled through the chaos. Some had managed to grip the hood and sides hard enough to hang on, though. With one hard swerve of my car, I managed to send them flying off. A couple of cultists got caught beneath my tires as I tore through the parking lot. The car jerked violently with every impact of flesh against metal. Their anguished screams rose above the engine, and I could feel the dragging friction under the wheels. Somewhere in the chaos, bodies rolled across the windshield and hands hammered on the trunk. The sound of them pounding on the car followed me as I peeled out of the parking lot. I checked my mirrors obsessively, scanning for any sign of headlights close behind while I approached the interstate. Thankfully, there weren't any. The vehicles that passed me on the highway made me flinch. I kept thinking it might be Fulci's cult. I honestly had no idea where I was going. I just kept driving and pulling off at random exits in the hopes that they would never find me. I didn't dare glance into the rearview mirror longer than I needed to. A rumbling sensation crept into my hands from how long and hard I had gripped the wheel for. My ribs throbbed in agony. The stinging sensation in my chest felt like I'd been attacked by 1,000 or more bees. Each breath I attempted turned into a pitiful, shallow gasp, causing shadows to linger at the edge of my vision. There was no doubt that I had fractured or broken ribs, but I couldn't afford to stop and take care of them right now. Miles slipped past, and I barely noticed until the gas light lit up on the dashboard. I pulled off at the next exit and parked at the pump of the closest gas station. What should have been a mindless task felt like a chore as I fumbled my way through opening the gas cap and putting the nozzle in to fill the tank. A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered the pegboard, my photo, and the words underneath. Shoot in progress. My love of horror movies had been used against me by Fulci. Those films weren't invitations. They were conditioning of the sickest kind. He wasn't just trying to scare or intimidate. He wanted to make me part of his narrative. What scared me the most was realizing how easy it was for him to weaponize his words. He had already amassed a following that believed in his ideology, so maybe in some ways, he was right about there being worship in horror. Maybe that's what horror really is. A way to condition and unlock the monsters that have been inside us all along. If that's true, then how many more people like that are out there waiting for their cue? The gas pump stopped with a loud click, interrupting my thoughts. I put the nozzle back into its place, climbed back into my car, and with a wheeze, I took off. When I merged back onto the highway, I watched the world outside my windshield smear into a blur of color and motion. Like a scene I couldn't cut away from. The scenery looped with every mile that stretched into the endless night. My body craved sleep, but the only reason I continued to remain awake was the pain in my ribs that continued to spread and burn like wildfire. Time bled together as I continued down the highway until I pulled into a rundown roadside motel parking lot. This was the happiest I'd ever been seeing a piece of shit place like this. A quick exchange with the guy at the desk managed to get me a room that smelled like a combination of old cigarettes and bleach. Despite the less than appealing nature of the room, it was the first time that I had felt safe in days. Immediately after getting inside and making sure that the coast was clear outside, I called my insurance company. I told them about the van rear-ending me and the extent of the damages from the vandalization. Afterwards, I called the police and I told them everything I knew. The address of the store, the license plate from the van that had chased me, and what I had seen on the tapes. The officer I spoke to assured me that there would be an extensive investigation, and that I would be contacted about making a statement later. I'd like to think that they believed me, but I'm not sure if they entirely did. I'm going to rough it out in this motel for a little bit and lay low. I'm posting this because I need people to know that if anything happens to me, or if anyone has any information at all about Final Cut Video, please contact the authorities. I might have a room with 4 walls, a lock, and a light I can leave on, but I'm not going anywhere until I know it's safe to go back outside again. When I know more about the status of my case, I'll continue to provide updates. Until then, this will be my final post about this. Even though I've escaped, I don't think they're done filming yet. I work at a funeral home, and a body keeps showing up in the wrong drawer. By Aaron is Not Funny, and you're listening to Creepypasta. I've been keeping track of the strange things that happen at the funeral home, mostly because I realized a few months into the job that if I didn't start writing them down, I would either forget the details or convince myself that none of it had actually happened. I told myself that this would help, that writing the occurrences down would make sense of them, or at least allow me to sleep at night, but the truth is that writing only seems to remind me of how little I actually understand this place. Last week, something happened that unsettled me more than anything I've experienced so far, and I know I need to share it before I lose track of the details. This one started last week with a body that was, in every possible way, completely ordinary. The body arrived late in the evening, unremarkable in every way. Normal age, ordinary cause of death, regular paperwork. Nothing about him stood out to me when we moved him onto the operating table, except for the way that his arm shifted slightly when we adjusted the sheet, which I told myself was just residual movement, the kind you read about in training but don't really expect to see. Martin didn't comment on it, so I didn't either. We tagged him, logged him, and placed him in the refrigeration unit like we always do. The same one we've used since I started here. Sliding the drawer closed into the seal caught with that familiar, slightly hollow sound that echoes more than it should in a room that small. I remember checking the label twice before I left. Not because anything seemed wrong, but because I had gotten into the habit of double-checking things after what happened with Daniel Crow. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, partly out of habit and partly because sleep has become a little more difficult since I started working here. After unlocking the front door and setting my things down in the office, I made my way back to the preparation room with the vague intention of getting a head start on the day's work before anyone else came in. The drawer was closed. That was the first thing I noticed, and for a moment it felt reassuring because it meant whatever I had expected to find, though I couldn't have said exactly what that was, hadn't happened. Then I opened it. It was empty. I froze, staring at the other drawers, my mind racing for a rational explanation. Maybe a janitor's mistake? Martin moving it temporarily, or a misread label? I stood there for several seconds looking at where the body should have been, trying to fit what I was seeing into something that made sense. There are only so many explanations for something like that, and all of them rely on the assumption that something ordinary has gone wrong in a way that can eventually be corrected. I checked the label again, even though I already knew it was the right drawer, and then I started opening the others. I went one by one, moving down the row more quickly than I probably should have, though I was still careful enough to make sure I wasn't overlooking something obvious in my haste. I found him 4 drawers over, positioned exactly as we had left him, sheet pulled up neatly, tag still in place. There was nothing to suggest anything had changed, except for the fact that he was no longer where he was supposed to be. I closed the drawer, paused, and then opened it again, just to confirm that I hadn't made a mistake. He remained where he was. When I told Martin, he listened without interrupting, his expression neutral in a way that I've come to recognize as intentional. When I finished explaining what I had found, he simply told me to write it down, as though that was the most practical and reasonable response to the situation. Time, drawer, anything else you notice? He said, already turning back to what he had been doing, which left me with the impression that this was not the first time something like this had happened, even if this was the first time I had been the one to notice it. The rest of the day was uneventful, and that night before I left, I checked the drawer again. I decided to let him stay in the drawer he was in when I came in that morning, but then, without really thinking about why, I marked the outside of the drawer. I pulled off a short piece of masking tape from the roll and stuck it over where the top of the drawer the body was, connected to the bottom edge of the drawer above it. That night, I went home with a small pit in my stomach, though I wasn't sure if I could explain exactly why. I knew that the body had freaked me out, but could I really convince myself, or anyone else, that the body had moved on its own during the night? I was one of the last ones to leave in the night, and I was the first to get there in the morning. Though any efforts I had put into easing my worries in the night were immediately undone the following morning. When I came to work the next morning, I skipped out on my normal morning routine and went straight downstairs to storage. To my relief, the drawer was still closed, but on further inspection, any hope I was feeling that I had imagined the events of yesterday left as soon as they had come. The mark was broken. The tape wasn't torn, but it had clearly been moved. It looked like someone peeled the tape off of the drawer, opened it, closed it again, and tried to press the tape back down to where it was before. I could tell that the tape had been removed because it was slightly creased and had a tiny dog ear fold at the top corner. And when I put my face closer to the tape, really trying to remember if I had just done a bad job at taping it shut yesterday, I could swear I saw a fingerprint on the tape. I remember feeling something settle in my chest at that point. Not panic exactly, but a certainty that whatever was happening was not the result of a mistake I could correct by being more careful. I steeled myself with a nervous, shaky breath, and I opened the drawer. It was empty, but this time I didn't hesitate. I moved through the others until I found him again, farther down, and positioned slightly differently than before. One arm dangled at just enough of an angle that I was certain it hadn't been the night before. Over the next few days, I documented everything. Not just the drawer numbers and the times, but the order I checked them in, the placement of the tools on the cart, the way the condensation formed along the inside of the unit doors, even the faint variations in the sounds of the refrigeration unit inside of the unit doors. Because the more I paid attention, the more it felt like the movement wasn't random. On the fourth night, I stayed late. I told Martin I had paperwork to finish, which was partially true, but I mostly wanted to see if anything would happen when I was there. Up until this point, all of the changes had occurred overnight, in that stretch of time where no one was watching. The building felt different at night, quieter in a way that seemed heavier rather than empty, like the absence of sound was itself something that had settled into the walls and floors. And when I stepped into the preparation room, I had the distinct feeling that I was interrupting something, though I couldn't have said what. The drawer was closed when I approached it, the metal handle colder than usual beneath my fingers. For a moment, I found myself hesitating, aware that this no longer felt like a routine action, but something closer to a confirmation of what I already suspected I would find. When I finally pulled it open, he was there, positioned exactly where I left him. The sheet was still drawn neatly over him, the tag still in place, and nothing at all to suggest that anything had changed. That should have felt reassuring, though it wasn't, because by that point the absence of change felt just as deliberate as the movements had. I stood there longer than I meant to, watching, listening, aware of the low, steady vibration of the unit beneath my hand, and the way the room seemed to hold its silence in a way that felt almost expectant, like it was waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. Eventually, I closed the drawer again, pressing it firmly until I felt the seal catch, and turned toward the door, already reaching for the light switch. I had all intentions of leaving, because there is a point where staying any longer stops feeling like observation and starts feeling like participation. And I was not sure which side of that line I was standing on anymore. Then, with my hand hovering just a foot or two from the switch, the lights went out. For a brief moment, the room existed only in the dim spill of light from the hallway behind me, enough to outline the edges of the counters and the shape of the refrigeration unit against the wall. It was enough light to barely see, but not enough to fill in the details. And it was in that in-between space where nothing was fully visible, but nothing was entirely hidden either, that I heard it. It was not loud, and it was not sudden. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like the careful shifting of weight across a surface. That kind of sound does not belong to machinery or settling buildings, but to something that is choosing to move. I did not turn immediately. Instead, I stood there with my hand still held up near the light switch, aware of the way the silence around the room seemed to deepen. I held my breath, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up one by one. Finally, a chill ran up my spine, and I worked up all of the courage I had left. When I turned back towards the unit, the drawer was open. Not partially, not slightly misaligned in a way that could be explained later, but fully extended with the metal track visible beneath it. The interior exposed in a way that made it immediately clear that it had not been left that way by accident. For a moment, I thought it was empty again. Then I realized I was looking at it from the wrong angle. It had been moved forward. Not dramatically, but enough that the sheet rested closer to the edge than it had before, the fabric catching lightly on the lip of the drawer as though it had been pushed off in that direction rather than placed there. I did not step closer. I did not reach out. I simply stood where I was, aware of the distance between us in a way that felt significant, as though it was something that could change without warning. After a few seconds that felt longer than they should have, I took a step back. I jumped when I was met with a clanging sound that echoed in the small room. The drawer didn't jerk or slide abruptly, but moved outwards in a small movement that caused it to extend out fully and collide with the end of the track. It stopped moving as soon as I did, as I froze in the middle of my backward step, startled by the sudden sound. I felt something shift in my understanding then, because up until that moment, I had been treating the movement as something separate from me, something that occurred independently and could be observed from a distance. I stepped back again, slower this time. The drawer followed, clanging into the edge of the track again. It wasn't by the same distance, but it was enough to make it clear that the relationship between my movement and its own was not coincidental. I stopped. It stopped. The room felt smaller then. Not physically, but in a way that made the space between us seem less reliable than it had before. Like it could close without any warning if I wasn't careful. I do not remember deciding to leave for the night, only that at some point I was no longer in the room, the light still off behind me, and the door closing with more force than I intended, the sound of it settling into the wooden frame louder than it should have been in the quiet hallway. I stood there for a moment, listening, half expecting to hear something from the other side of the door. Maybe another shift, another movement, something that would confirm that it had not stopped simply because I wasn't looking at it anymore. There was nothing. The silence returned, steady and unbroken, as though the room had arrested itself the moment I stepped out of it. And the next morning, when I returned to work like I always do, the drawer was closed. I stood in front of it for longer than I should have, my hand resting lightly on the handle, aware of the faint vibration beneath my fingers and the way it felt like it went straight through to my bones. My hesitation had become more pronounced than it had even last night, some part of me already understanding that opening it was no longer just a matter of confirming what could have changed, but acknowledging that it would. when I did finally pull it open, it was empty. I did not check the others right away. Instead, I turned, already aware of where my attention was being drawn, and found him on the preparation table. He was positioned neatly, the sheet folded back just slightly enough to expose his face to the overhead light. There was something different about him then, something subtle enough that I might not have noticed if I hadn't already been looking for changes, because his head had shifted just enough that it was no longer angled up in that familiar neutral position. His head was turned slightly towards the door, toward the space where I stood. I remained where I was, aware of the distance between us, aware of the stillness of the room, and aware of the uncomfortable certainty that whatever had been happening over the past few days was no longer contained to a pattern that I could observe and record without consequence. I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door, leaving everything exactly as it was. I went home earlier than usual that day, taking the same route I always take through town. The sidewalks mostly empty, the fog still lingering in the spaces between buildings where the streetlights don't quite reach. And for a while, the walk felt no different than it ever had. The sound of my footsteps steady against the pavement, the quiet of the town settling in around me in that familiar, muted way. It wasn't until several minutes had passed that I became aware of a second rhythm beneath my own, faint enough that I could have dismissed it as an echo or a trick of the way sound carries in the fog, but consistent enough that I could not ignore it once I had noticed it. I slowed, not abruptly, but gradually, paying closer attention to the spacing of my steps. I heard the way each one landed and lifted, and the sound behind me that adjusted with it. Not perfectly, not in a way that mirrored me exactly, but in a way that suggested awareness rather than a coincidence. When I came to a stop, the sound behind me did the same. Not immediately, but after a slight delay, as though whatever was making it needed an extra moment to register the change. I did not turn right away. Instead, I stood there listening, aware of the quiet pressing in on all sides, aware of how little there was to mask the sound if it chose to return. And when I finally looked back, there was nothing there. The sidewalk stretched empty behind me, the fog softening the edges of everything softly, until the distance became difficult to judge. For a moment, I considered the possibility that I had imagined it entirely, that the pattern I thought I had heard was nothing more than my own steps reflected back at me in a way I had misinterpreted. Then I started walking again, and after a few seconds, the second rhythm returned. Faint, measured, following. I have been writing it down even more consistently since then. Every detail, every change, every small inconsistency that refuses to settle into something I can explain, because it feels increasingly important that I keep track of where things are supposed to be, even if that understanding only lasts until the next time I look. But I have stopped trying to move him, and I have started paying attention to the spaces outside of the funeral home, because I can no longer ignore the possibility that whatever has been shifting inside that room might not be confined to it, and that the distance between where it is and where I am may not be as fixed as I once believed it to be. We built a 4-dimensional house. Shouldn't have walked on the roof. By Rowan Redfang, and welcome to Clancypasta. Architects are artists who tell space how to behave. We are taught from day one to respect the ground. We spend our lives fighting stress and begging gravity to let our work stand. Dahlia and I instead spent the last decade figuring out how to insult all of that. Because for thousands of years, humanity had been unaware that they were only building on the surface of the universe. The mountain wind bit through my coat with the scent of electric fumes and pine trees. I stood at the edge of the concrete platform behind a blast-resistant glass shield. The clearing around us was a crater we had ripped out of the forest, made of dirt and gravel, hidden between the Alps. General Hansen's squad had butchered over 40 acres of ancient pine to clear the perimeter. Dahlia stood beside me, her fingers tapping on her tablet. It glowed across her face and highlighted the exhaustion under her eyes. She hadn't slept in almost 48 hours, and neither had I. We didn't need coffee. Adrenaline running through our veins made even the cold wind irrelevant. I couldn't take my eyes off our life's work, what we had sacrificed our 30s for. Swimming through the pre-dawn mist on the concrete foundation was our monument to insanity. 8 individual cubes, each measuring 40 feet across, made from high-density polymers, tungsten, and steel. 4 of them were stacked vertically into a tower. The remaining 4 extended outwards from the 3rd floor, branching in all 4 directions, like a cross, or what it actually was, an unwrapped tesseract. The structure offended the natural landscape of the mountain. All around it was my wife Dahlia's contribution to my genius. The GFA, Gravitational Folder Array, a ring of 12 superconducting pillars, and black towers connected by cables filled with liquid helium to prevent overheating. And all those armed soldiers surrounding the structure were completely unaware that their rifles would be useless against mathematics. They kept shifting their weights in the cold. Pressure across the primary nodes is stabilizing. Generators are at a maximum capacity, Dahlia said, with that melody in her voice, like every time the numbers finally made sense. She tucked a lock of her dark hair behind her ear. She went on. We need the structural integrity to hold, Johann. The GFA is going to peak at almost 400 G inside the ring. If it buckles under the pressure, we're going to create a localized micro-black hole instead of folding the building. My work is fine, Dahlia, I said. I made sure to over-engineer the load by a factor of 5. I couldn't help but grin as I traced the lines of the building against the rising sun. We're about to force the universe to accept our new reality. A Nobel Prize awaits you, and the Pritzker for me. I chuckled. They'll have to invent new categories of awards after this. The gravel behind us crunched under heavy boots approaching. General Hansen stepped into the light, flanked by 2 soldiers and their rifles. He wore a parka over his uniform, exhaling clouds with each breath. From the look on his bearded face, I could tell he considered joy to be a tactical disadvantage. I couldn't remember ever seeing him smile. Aren't you planning your award ceremonies too early, Dr. Johann? He said, with that thick German accent. We've been freezing here for weeks now. I'm looking at 8 very expensive plastic boxes. Tell me you're not going to actually crush them. Explain to me again what we're buying before I choose to freeze the money instead of my men. I turned, ready to fend off his skepticism. To think that Dahlia and I were the only people in the world who understood the punchline to the greatest joke ever told to science. Imagine you take a cardboard box and put it in a hydraulic press, I said, gesturing at the structure. What happens? You flatten the box, the general said. Indeed, it doesn't disappear. All the material is still there, just folded into a lower dimension. It becomes a square, from a 3D object to a 2D. I understand how a trash compactor works, Doctor, and I don't like the thought of flattening 50 million euros of NATO funding. We're not crushing anything, I said, unable to keep that electric excitement out of my voice. I was shaking. We just compress a dimension. According to our calculations, the other 7 cubes will compress into the exact same coordinates as the first one without intersecting. They will overlap quantum mechanically. It's topology, Dahlia intervened. Her voice was the perfect counter to mine, calm and precise. The GFA generates a localized gravity well, so intense it will bend spatial dimensions inwards. It will project the building into a higher dimensional space and leave only a 3D cross-section behind. Hansen took a sip from his thermos, shifting his gaze up to my beautiful building. So, like a pocket dimension? You're telling me you can fit an entire base inside a closet? Yes, kind of, I said, clapping once and pointing a finger at him. Imagine infinite space on a finite plot of land. It will revolutionize urban planning, architecture, and storage. Hansen interrupted me. Deployment. A bunker that can't be hit by missiles because the interior doesn't exist outside it. Do it then, Doctor. Let's see where our money went. Dahlia and I exchanged looks. A decade had passed. A decade of failed grants and scientific mockery, of sleepless nights and broken prototypes, all conveyed between us in a single glance. She nodded and tapped a sequence on her tablet. We all put our earmuffs on. Our hands joined together on the safety switch mounted on the side of the console. Then we turned the key and pressed the interface. The earth shook when the GFA screamed like a giant beast. Its engines rumbled as massive amounts of power were released into the pillars, more than what could power an entire city. The air pressure dropped quickly and made our ears ring. A frequency followed that hit my chest and made my bones rattle and my teeth ache. The reaction assaulted our biology rather than our eyes. There was no flash of light or laser beams. It all happened just like in our simulation. The space between the pillars boiled, and the air turned into a violent but warm storm that melted the snow around them. I couldn't take my eyes off the building. Lights bent all around it, following geometric arcs that were impossible to predict. Gravitational lensing. That was the name. Like the light of a star passing behind a black hole. Even space itself warped, behaving like air above a jet plane. Gravity was pulling it inwards. All the steel stretched into a translucent distortion, slowly bleeding into the cube beneath. I tasted blood in my mouth, but I ignored it. We knew it would happen. Completely mesmerized, I watched the solid matter fold onto itself. The 4 cubes flanking the 3rd floor collapsed inwards through the center, drawn by the crushing gravity. The architecture was literally recalculating itself, folding angles that our brain could never process. And behind the building, the sky appeared to fracture into thousands of shapes, turning the visual into an ever-shifting mosaic of static. Geometry was melting, liquefying and sliding through the metal. We stared at the matter collapsing towards the central point, but at the same time remaining in the same place. The absurdity of the view made my stomach turn. I gagged, but forced my eyes to stay open. The scream reached its peak with a vibration that almost shattered the glass. With a shock wave of air that slammed dirt and leaves across it, the noise vanished. A perfect silence fell onto the entire mountain. When the ringing in my ears faded, I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, and just then I noticed my nose was bleeding. Dahlia also had a thin line of blood on her lips, and so did Hansen and his soldiers. They moaned, holding their temples. I raised my gaze and looked past the cracked glass. The mist had disappeared, and not just that. "My God," I whispered. My towering cross of 8 cubes was gone. In the center of the concrete platform and the ring of black pillars sat a single cube. Just the ground floor. Hansen stepped forward with a face of shock that spoke for itself. "What happened?" he yelled. "Where's the rest of it? Did it disintegrate? You told me you were going to compress it, Doctor. Did you just destroy years of work?" I ignored him and stared, my palms and face pressing against the glass. "Dahlia, the telemetry?" "It's stable," she said, out of breath. Her fingers tapped across the tablet. "It's there. The mass readings on the platform haven't changed at all. It's still supporting the same weight as before. The spatial overlapping is holding. The W-axis compression is at 100%. She smiled at me, and so did I. The hypervolume folded successfully. "It worked," I said, trying to catch my breath. "It's all inside." Dahlia slammed into me. My legs were giving out, but my hands, still shaking, wrapped around her coat and held her tight. I buried my face into her shoulder with tears wetting the fabric. We hugged, ignoring the soldiers and the freezing wind returning. Like 2 people who'd spent the last 10 years digging a tunnel out of a prison, and finally found freedom. "Where did the other floors go?" the general asked. "It's all there," I said. "We just can't see the other 7 rooms because our eyes are locked into 3 dimensions. We're just looking at a single face of it." "Radiation levels are negligible," Dahlia reported, her eyes darting between her tablet and the single cube. "Gravity is normalized. Atmosphere is standard." We walked across the dirt towards the perimeter of the platform. Hansen followed us, flanked by his soldiers, their faces paled in confusion. From that angle, the cube looked completely normal. Just a gray box of brutalist architecture with a door on the front and windows on the sides. "So?" the general said with a gesture towards the cube. Can we walk inside? Not yet, I answered. I was about to continue when I took a few steps to the right to get a better angle of the structure. And the magic happened. As my perspective shifted, the cube reacted. It moved. The front face containing the door contracted inwards and flattened into a sheet of light. At the same time, the left wall unfolded outwards to replace it. The door became a ghostly image that lingered for a second before bleeding and vanishing. It slid back into the center and became translucent, while a blank panel folded out from the opposite side. I stopped dead and watched in awe. "My God," the general said. "What the hell is that?" one of the soldiers yelled, aiming his rifle at the cube. "Do not shoot!" we both screamed. Hansen drew his own rifle, taking a step back. "Dr. Johann, the building is moving. You said it was stable. Why is it tracking us?" I could hear both Dahlia's heart and mine hammering in the silence. I sidestepped to the right, and the cube reacted instantly. The wall retracted into an impossible center, and the face with the door came back, pulled from the interior to face me again. Its motions were so fluid and sickening to watch. "It's not moving, and it's not tracking us," I said, taking ragged breaths. The knowledge hit me with massive force. "Nothing is alive, General. It's just the projection." "Speak English, Doctor," Hansen said without lowering his weapon. "He's right." Dahlia stepped in front of him. "Think of a normal 3D cube. If you look straight at it, you only see one face, a square. But if you walk around it, you see the other faces. What we're looking at is no longer a cube. This is a tesseract, a 4D hypercube. It possesses 8 cubical faces, but because it's now existing in a 3D space, it has to rotate its hypervolume to maintain continuity in our field of vision. It's not moving. Our movements are forcing its projection to recalculate. We can only perceive one cross-section at a time. "Send the drone in," Hansen ordered. "Nobody is stepping inside a building that can't decide what shape it is." A soldier carried a large drone. He set it on the concrete and stepped back. The front door of the cube could be opened via remote control. Dahlia tapped on her tablet and, with an echoing screech, the door swung open. Inside, the lights were on. The interior looked just like before. Sterile walls and a table bolted to the floor. In the corner, the staircase leading to the second floor. The drone rolled on the concrete and crossed the threshold of the cube. We all gathered around the monitor of the soldier handling it. The camera feed showed a perfectly normal view. The lighting was fine. The table showed no visible changes. "Upstairs," I said, as we all stared in silence. "Make it proceed upstairs." The soldier nodded. The drone rolled towards the staircase and raised its mechanical legs to begin a slow climb. None of us dared make a sound. We stopped breathing as the images appeared on the monitor. The drone reached the top of the stairs and rolled onto the second floor. I don't understand," Hansen said. He pointed a finger at the screen. "The drone is going up, but there's no second floor there. Where is it going?" "Because it worked. The internal volume is maintained. The second floor exists within the folded dimension." Dahlia replied. He didn't answer. The drone reached the second floor, transmitting footage of the room and its pristine walls and window. Hansen was no longer looking at the monitor. I followed his gaze. So did Dahlia, her face paling. Hovering over the cube, directly above the center, was the drone. Instead of flying, it stood there, existing in a space that our eyes couldn't understand. Its shape stretched and twisted to infinity like a graphic glitch. It folded open, showing the internal wiring and circuits, all the gears and treads, the camera lens, everything occupying the same visual plane. We were looking at an autopsy of a robot floating above the cube. But the monitor still showed the images from the inside without issues. As it moved, the metal skeleton kept distorting into long spikes and snapping back into a cluster made of all its components. Inside the building, it was still navigating the second floor intact. "It's moving through the W axis," I whispered. "It's not broken, we're just seeing the light escaping the folding. That's its cross-section passing through our dimension. That's fascinating." The view was horrifying, but it was also the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We'd done it. "General, prepare the suits," I said. "We're going in." 2 of the last 10 years went into designing those, just for this moment. Thick shells over a flexible membrane, with an exterior of layered polymer that caught the sunlight. The helmet sealed at the neck with a pressurized collar. The 4 security locks clicked, one at a time. We looked like something between deep-sea divers and astronaut. "Dr. Johann, you want me to put this on while my men are securing the perimeter in winter clothes?" Hansen said, pulling at the gloves of his suit. "This feels a bit excessive." "If you prefer to walk in without one," Dahlia intervened, "be our guest, General." "You said the building is stable." "Indeed it is," I said, working the zipper on my torso. "But we're not. Our bodies are still 3D. That stops being trivial when we cross that." I pointed towards the cube. "The GFA compressed the volume across a W axis that we don't possess a sensory organ for. If we walk in there without protection, every cell in our bodies will be trying to occupy the same coordinates as themselves. Our organs would unfold outside of them." The general didn't answer. Dahlia finished the explanation. "The suits enforce boundary conditions. They keep our body's location consistent. In short, they will tell the universe that we are still 3-dimensional in a very angry way." Hansen grunted, looking unhappy with the explanation, but he put on the helmet. The suits were wired, 4 cameras each, 1 in each direction, and microphones. The soldiers outside would have a live feed, or so we thought. Dahlia had done the math on what happened to electromagnetic signals when they crossed a dimensional edge, but we chose not to share that with the general yet. He grabbed his rifle and led the way. We crossed the platform. 3 people who had run out of things to say. The cube sat there in the center of the ring of pillars, like something people would worship. A puzzle waiting to be solved, or a warning begging to be heard. The mist had cleared, leaving behind a sky too blue and clear like the world itself wanted to observe. Hansen walked in first, raising the rifle to shoulder height. To greet us was the most normal banality, just as all the times we'd gone in before. The walls, the table. On the opposite side, a window showed the mountains and the line of pines. The sunlight came from the distance and formed a yellow glowing square on the floor. Nothing told us we were navigating a hyper-volume. "Smells like a construction site," Hansen said. Dahlia's helmet shook slowly. "No, it doesn't. We can't perceive smells through the suit. It's a phantom sensation." She checked the reading on her tablet. Atmosphere is standard. Oxygen at 21%. Gravity is 9.81. She glanced towards the window. Visual from outside is undistorted. "Of course," I said. "We're still in the 3D section." The drone sat at the top of the staircase where it had stopped, intact. Its light blinked green and steady. It might have sounded silly, but I felt affection for it. It went in first and came back fine. The first human-made object to step in a 4D space. A hero robot. Humanity would remember it like the first man on the moon. I smiled. The staircase ended in a square hole in the ceiling. The normalcy in our footsteps' noise made cold sweat run behind my neck. Hansen swept the barrel of his rifle across the room as he approached the staircase. "Keep a tight formation." "General, there are no living entities in this structure," Dahlia said, following. "Furthermore, your weapon is about to experience some unfolding. I suggest you leave it downstairs." Hansen ignored her. His helmet pointed up, eyes locked on the top as he climbed the first step. We followed close behind, boots echoing in the narrow space. Each step felt too ordinary, and for that reason, my teeth couldn't stop chattering. We moved at a snail's pace. It took a lifetime to reach the top. When we stepped onto the second floor, none of us moved or said anything. Hansen stood with both hands at his sides and his rifle down. I watched him, trying to understand that there was indeed a second floor, that it existed, had walls and a floor and lights and windows, and that his rifle was no longer a rifle. It had unfolded, just as Dahlia and I predicted, just like our bodies would have done without the suits. In the same way a book opens, but on its own. The barrel extended, flattened, and at the same time curved into itself. The body peeled along an axis that our brains couldn't comprehend. Everything spread outwards into an arrangement of components that were still connected, but pointed everywhere and nowhere, like a schematic. Hansen dropped it and stepped back. It became a smear of its own components and settled into a tangle of metal and plastic. The thud bounced off interconnecting walls. Hansen yelled, "What the hell is that? You said it would break!" "We said it would unfold," Dahlia clarified. "That's the accurate term." "There's no reason it should do that." "Oh, there's every reason for it to do that," I said. The conversation died when we raised our gazes. The room had done the same thing the rifle did, but in a larger way. Facing me was the north wall, or what I thought was the north wall. It occupied the same space in which the floor should have been, and both surfaces were visible. Below us, No, not below, through us. The first floor was visible without a gap, but through what I called an overlap. The window was on the east wall, but also on the south wall. It showed the outside, a band of compressed images along the edge of my vision. Trees and concrete stretched and compressed like crumpled balls of paper. The nausea came back stronger when I looked around. I was about to throw up. The walls were transparent. I was viewing the first floor from an angle that shouldn't exist. Our little hero, the drone, sat there, all its internal body stretched into a glitch, its anatomy looping endlessly. If we had walked in without these suits, Hansen muttered. Instantaneous death, Dahlia answered. Our topology would have attempted to recalculate to fit the 4D space, I added. All our organs and skin and bones and veins, they would. That's enough, Dr. Johann. I got it. Hansen walked towards the window with careful steps over a floor that intersected with the world below. He tried to communicate with his soldiers, but was met only with static noise. Oh, we expected that, I said. Radio waves in a 4D space propagate in a hypersphere rather than a sphere. In a folded environment, the propagation path doesn't end where the receiver is. The signal has nowhere to arrive. Think of it like trying to deliver a package to an address that exists on every road on the planet. So we're isolated. We've always been, Dahlia said, with no worry in her voice. We just couldn't prove it until now. The light shifted. The entire room darkened. I caught something at the edge of the window. Darkness, like a shadow moving. It crossed the mountains and the structure, and it was gone in a second. Could it have been a cloud? It made sense. The sunlight traveled inside the building, after all. Did you see that? Hansen asked. Gravitational glitch, probably, I answered. With the GFA bending the space, visual artifacts are to be expected. We climbed to the third floor. It required concentration. The distortion made the distance between the steps impossible to understand. When we reached the top, my obsession peaked. The only way to describe the floor was a theorem. As we came up suddenly, there were 5 rooms, and none of them had a door, or even a wall between them and us. The corridor, walls, bathroom, the bedrooms, and the studio we'd built around the middle room, all were accessible at the same time. Their interiors folded open. The porcelain of the bathtub intersected with the mattress of the bedroom. Studio desks floated inside closets. This is unreal, Hansen commented, spinning once. It's real, Dahlia whispered, and spectacular. To a 3-dimensional observer watching from outside, we must be teleporting, I said. If we walked to the studio, we'd just appear there. Dahlia crouched beside the bathroom wall, which was also every other room's wall and also the floor. I watched as her hand reached into the bedroom, moving through nothing, where the walls unfolded. She lifted a pen from the desk, and it came back to her hand, unfolding itself like everything else. Did you just grab that through the wall? Hansen said. Object retrieval across boundaries with no physical transit, she said, holding the twisting thing up. Technically, There is no wall, I said. The 5 rooms share a 3D space, so their surface distributed into the available geometry. Imagine a house drawn on paper, all flat. A 2D person living inside, the drawing must move through its doors because the walls are impassable. But for you, looking down at the page, everything can be reached without touching a single door. The walls can't stop you because you are approaching from an axis that doesn't exist for the second person. That's us, right now. We are standing above the page. I should stop asking questions, Hansen said. There was a table in the studio, which we'd put as a simulated habitation test. And from the higher dimension I could see the top and the bottom at the same time. I could see inside the drawers. Dahlia ran her measurements again. Atmosphere still standard and gravity at 9.6. Interesting. A small deviation, but not alarming. Radiation increased slightly, but still way below dangerous levels. As the general inspected the floor, attempting to pick up objects through walls, we collected data, talking and comparing numbers. And so, we heard it. First came a vibration, a frequency that our microphones caught before our ears did. It rose into a moan, deep and uneven. Something that didn't fit any scale we could identify. The closest thing I could compare it to was a whale's lament, but it came from above. At the same moment, the light dropped again. This time, all the rooms darkened for several seconds, as if something was passing between the sun and us. Can visual artifacts make noise, Dr. Johann? Hansen said. We don't know, Dahlia answered, and I knew her too well to see how much those words hurt her to say. The readings are normal. Nothing spiked during that. No pressure change, no radiation anomaly. Nothing. It might be dimensional resonance, I said. In a folded space, the geometry is touching the adjacent regions. Sound might behave differently. Instead of propagating through a medium, it goes through the shape of space itself, and the shape of space here is... I gestured, unsure of what to say. I don't know. Maybe an acoustic artifact from the fold itself. From the fold? Hansen echoed. Like an echo, from the shape of the room instead of the room. The staircase to the last floor felt steeper, harder to climb. We didn't need the readings to notice the air was different, heavier, holding a certain resistance, the same way air feels before a huge storm. When the pressure drops and the body knows before the eyes see it. Our suits register the change. Gravity is at 8.8. We've lost over 10%. Dahlia held her tablet up. Radiation went up 40%. Still within safe levels, but it spiked. Pressure is down 8%. She turned to face me. Johann, this wasn't in our simulations. Is that a problem? Hansen asked. I wanted to tell him no, that everything was fine. It means the fold here is affecting more than the physical geometry. There might be let's call it a battle between the compression and the gravitational field we hadn't accounted for. Will the suits hold? They will. They can hold more than this, Dahlia confirmed. We stepped towards the windows of the 4th floor, and outside, the world had broken. It had said a huge fuck you to perspective. It took me a minute to understand what I was looking at. The soldiers down there, all of them, I could see every single one, were visible in their entirety. No, not through their clothes or skin. Through everything. Their full architecture flattened in the same space as their bodies. Muscle stretched over bones, opened like a blueprint. Their lungs pulsed with each breath, and the blood traveled through arteries across the whole body. They walked around and talked to each other, unaware we were looking at them from a dimension they couldn't see. To another person, it must have been horrifying. To me, it was the most intimate thing I'd ever seen. "My men!" Anson yelled when he looked out. "They're fine, General," I said. From their position, nothing changed. We're just looking at them from above the page. Remember? They only look like that from up here. Anson stepped back and didn't look again. Dahlia took her measurements as I photographed every overlapped surface. We checked every reading and talked to each other at a speed that made it sound like a foreign language to anyone who hadn't spent a decade on this project. I laughed when she made a joke, a good one that nobody else but the two of us could get. The last staircase loomed in front of us, ending in a metal door. The roof access. In the exact position where we'd built it. And that never sparked any particular interest in me, until that moment. The air was becoming too dense, and the gravity was playing unfunny jokes, but I wanted to do it. I had to. Observe the world in full tetradimensional space. I had to see what was on the other side. "We have sufficient data," Dahlia said. "We should head back." Her face through her helmet was something I couldn't read. For the first time since we'd met in middle school. We were both doing the calculation, but not the same one. "We didn't come this far only to go back one step from the finish line," I said. "We came this far to collect data, Johann, and we have enough. We've proved the hypervolume exists. The space is too volatile. But there's more above us. That's the problem. There could be too much above us." Anson stepped between us, facing me. "I'll say this. Whatever made that sound earlier came from up there." He pointed at the roof door. "And my opinion about sounds I can't identify is to not walk towards them." It was an artifact. We're literally bending space-time. Oddities are to be expected. "You said you didn't know what it was, Dr. Johann." "I just don't know what category it belongs to. We've spent 10 years building this door, and I'm not refusing to open it now that it stands in front of me," I said, too loudly, stepping past both of them and climbing the distorted steps 3 at a time. "This is the paradigm shift. I am documenting the roof." They rushed, trying to stop me, but I grabbed the handle and pushed the door open. I stepped out, and the sky stepped in. Literally. I stood on the roof of a hypercube, right at the top of the dimensional boundary. The sky had become an intersection of all possible skies, with every point visible as a volume instead of a surface, coming from all directions at once. Its layers curved and looped around each other, through cloud formations existing in their full 3D shape, instead of a flat ceiling. The atmosphere became an ocean of fractals with impossible geometry and colors that I'd never seen. And I could see time. Echoes of snow falling upwards, crossing the light of billions of different galaxies overlapping into a singularity. This is beautiful. Dahlia gasped behind me, mesmerized. Hansen said nothing. We all looked up in awe. We spread across the roof and walked around. The data kept coming in faster than we could process it. Electromagnetic fields, pressure, gravitational waves, an atmosphere at an altitude we were and were not. And in all that, I couldn't stop talking. I must have said the words Nobel Prize 10 times. We were going to rewrite all the basic principles of physics. No, of all science. We stood where nobody had ever stood before in the history of the universe, in the hypervolume of a folded dimension, and we looked at it from above the page. The building vibrated before our suits registered it, and the light changed again. This time we could see it clearly. The entire sky darkened from every direction at once, and we all knew this wasn't how darkness worked. This wasn't how anything worked. The sound came again, longer and louder. It came from inside the vibration, from above. We looked up just as it arrived. I had no idea what I was looking at. My brain tried its best to find logic in it, but the numbers were all wrong. The world was wrong. A surface, or better, a membrane, except it was neither. As we watched, it shifted. One moment there was a sheet of glistening material that moved with the typical irregularity of a living being. The next moment, it folded out into a shape my eyes couldn't process. Not just because of its instability. That valley of pulsing red mountains slid with calcified columns like the supports of the cathedral made of flesh and bone. It materialized out of nothing, spanning miles and miles, and faded into waterfalls of black fluid. The tissue sliced into the three-dimensional space, constantly warping and folding. On Dahlia's tablet, the gravitational readings did something we never expected. It dropped, faster and faster. 3, 2, 1. Then it reached 0. What happened next was wrong. It went against every law of physics. It dropped below 0. That minus sign before the number mocked our pathetic human brains. It had to be wrong. The device had to be broken. Negative gravity? What nonsense was that? Our feet left the roof. I had no time to be surprised, but enough to anchor myself on the roof door. The gravitational pull was no longer downward. My vision twisted and slowly rotated until the sky was below me, like an endless ocean, and the roof was now a ceiling. Hansen floated in the air. Both his hands grabbed my ankle. Below him, dangling over the 40 ocean, Dahlia clung to Hansen's belt, her boots kicking the empty space. "Johann!" she cried out. "Hansen, don't let go!" I shouted. As the pull intensified, the most horrifying hypothesis came to my mind. Whatever that thing passing through the three-dimensional space was, it must have been so massive that it possessed its own gravitational field. That's when I realized what we saw was only the 3D projection of something much, much larger. just like a cube, appeared as a square on a 2D surface, showing a fraction of its real size. How massive was that thing? I had no idea how to describe it. The shape in the sky below us kept changing and moving. The darkness had become absolute, like floating in open space. It covered everything. "Pull," Hansen said. "I am pulling." But neither of us moved, because there was nothing to move towards. The door was the only fixed point remaining. The entire building was shaking. The thing below us was still there, moving, passing, arriving and departing in every direction at once. Hansen's hand slipped from my ankle, and I managed to twist and grab him with one hand just in time. But the grip was weak. "The suits are failing," Dahlia shouted. The exoskeletons groaned and bent under the immense gravity. I'm slipping," Hansen said. I clenched my jaw so hard, tasting blood. The pull of that thing was astronomical, but this was no attack. Whatever it was, it didn't even acknowledge us. We were just ants, caught in the gravitational destruction of a passing god. 3 fingers, then 2. Hansen's hand slipped. I watched as they fell. The edges of their suits first flickered in the same way the drone had done from outside. Their bodies appeared to me in cross-section, and then in a section I had no name for. They stretched along the W-axis. "Dahlia!" I screamed. They fell into the sky, plummeting towards the endless expanse of red and white. The 3D barriers of their bodies ceased to exist. They elongated into a loop of infinite ribbons made of cross-sections of their internal structures. Their limbs stretched for hundreds of feet down the void, like falling into a black hole. Among the unfolding structures, flattening and adding more colors to the sky, I saw their eyes, massive and distorted, staring up at me, and filled with such an agony that it broke my very soul. Their screams came through the comms, and after a second, they turned into a loud, electric static. When the light returned, my vision rotated again. Gravity slammed me on the roof floor and left me lying on the concrete with the 4D sky back above me. My shoulder broke with a sickening crack. I screamed, not from pain. I screamed until my throat burned and I choked. I dragged myself towards the stairs and rolled down. I stumbled blindly through the lower floor, crying. On the second floor, Hansen's rifle was still on the floor, unfolded. The drone continued its mapping. On the first floor, the world returned 3-dimensional. A soldier caught me when I stepped outside. I burst through the front door and ripped the helmet off my head. Then I vomited bile and blood onto the concrete. I woke up to a hospital ceiling. Radiation, they told me. I'd been exposed to massive amounts that the suit failed to protect me from. They'd never stopped questioning me about what happened, but I hadn't managed to speak a single word. The doctors looked afraid of telling me the truth. Weeks, or a few days, most likely. That's how long I have left. I'm in a bed with a window that faces the city and the sky above it. An ordinary sky. A blue 2-dimensional surface. I'm tired and my hands are cold. 10 years we spent building a door to somewhere nobody could have ever reached. We proved it was there, that we could go in and come back, or that at least I could. Once. And then pay the price from beyond the grave. I know Dahlia's not dead. I want to clarify this. Her suit didn't break last time I saw her. In higher dimensions, time is just another direction one can move. She must be stretching across eternity in a moment of biological unfolding that never ends. But she's up there, and I'm going to meet her soon. Who knows? Maybe all of us are going to very soon. Because just a moment ago, a sound echoed through the glass, coming from the sky. Deep and steady, like a whale's lament. Just when the light shifted and the room darkened for a second. That shift when something passes between you and the light. It swam across the sky. I saw it, eclipsing the entire planet. A colossal section of glistening muscle and bone. Its shape changing and moving in every direction at once, bleeding from its higher dimension into ours. I'm sorry. I brought it here. I don't know when it's going to tear the sky open, but I know that the sirens won't even have time to start. I just hope I'll be gone before that. I Tried to Rush a Bonsai by Bilbo Cheated, and you're listening to Creepypasta. I think I have time to write this. Things have calmed down for now. I have my chair wedged against the door, just in case. There's tapping at the window. I'm on the second floor of my house, and there used to be no trees outside my window. I need to find a way out, and this message needs to get out so no one makes the same mistakes. We have to go back a few months for you to understand. I just moved to this new rental home. The only issue is that the landlord did not allow pets, which seemed criminal with the large fenced-in yard. I asked anyway. No pets, he said. I've been burned before. What if I kept up the garden? I asked. Would that change anything? About the dog? No. What about the rent? He looked out at the yard like he was already disappointed with the job I would do. Spring and summer only, he said. That's when the yard will need work. If it starts looking like hell, the discount goes away. Yes, sir. Tools are in the basement. That should have been the end of it. Discounted rent and some yard work. But I still wanted something to scratch that itch. Bonsai was an option. I'd never really considered it before, but I went all in watching videos, reading forums, buying those expensive little pruners. I learned about wiring trunks, exposing roots, and shaping miniature trees over the years. That was the issue. Years. Most of it just waiting around, especially in the first couple of years. Decades pass before you have anything impressive. Some trees are relatively faster growing. I still wanted the satisfaction of growing the tree from a seed, but I just didn't have the patience for it. One night I decided to buy seeds. I had to go deep into Google to find non-sponsored links. I wanted seeds from a specialty vendor. On about page 9, I clicked on a site. I can't remember the name, but it had to do with accelerated seed stock and touted seeds that can produce mature-looking bonsai in months. The site looked old, with a white screen, grainy pictures, and blue links. I clicked on one photo link that looked like a Chinese elm. There were no Latin names that I recognized on the site. I am embarrassed by the price I ended up paying. The product had all 5-star reviews, so I was hopeful. One of the most peculiar details that I can remember is returns only accepted in original soil and original shipping container. I bought a packet of 3 for a discounted rate and never received a confirmation email. I got back on the site the next morning, and that listing was gone. I thought it was a scam and got a new debit card to be safe. 2 weeks passed, and I was surprised by a small but heavy box on my doorstep. The outer cardboard shipping box didn't seem to be postmarked, but I was too excited to care. The inner box was wooden and closed with a brass clasp. The inside was lined with a grayish-blue metal. At the top of the small container, there was an instruction card. Germination stock 3. Use dehydrated soil puck. Enclosed. Keep contained indoors. Do not overwater. Keep in a well-ventilated location. Do not allow root access beyond pot. Odd? Yes. But I laughed this off at the time as some branding gimmick. The seeds themselves were larger than I had expected, and I noticed they were warm when I planted them in a small pot in the corner of my den near the floor vent. After a week, I thought I'd been scammed. No growth. But one morning, I woke up to a small green stalk. Finally, one was successful. From there, things seemed normal but fast. Within a few weeks, it had a tiny trunk with a branching structure ready to be wired and shaped. I was so happy with the results so far, I wanted to leave a review, but I couldn't find the site. I was so pleased that I even started posting photos to show off the growth. My friends were impressed, and the internet thought I was either lying about the age or accusing me of buying it from a nursery. One commenter even suggested that I had misidentified the tree species. These accusations didn't make me angry. They made me proud of my work. It was worth every penny. Soon it was time for pruning to shape the limbs. I spent some time studying the tree before making my first cut. When I did, dark sap began to ooze from the wound. My mouth began to taste as if I had just swallowed my car keys. I hope it isn't diseased. I took all the precautions, I thought. I opened the pruners around the second branch. Before I could close them, another branch snapped across the back of my hand. It cut me like a bad paper cut. I told myself, maybe I bumped it and shifted the branches. Or maybe it's a draft. The AC just came on. I finally managed to prune it properly, but I was worried about the sap's smell. But it did its job and sealed up the wounds I caused. And by morning, the tree had pushed out new buds from the pruned branches. A few weeks later, the tree had grown enough that I wanted to move it to a larger, nicer bonsai pot. Repotting would also let me expose part of the root system. I thought it would enhance the beauty of the tree. I could also use this to change to a premium bonsai soil mix. I was surprised by the weight of the pot. I had to use twice as much strength as I thought to even get it off the table. I almost dropped everything when I encountered more resistance. As I looked back, I noticed the thick, pale roots had grown through the drainage holes. As I tracked it, my eyes traced over to the air vent. The roots had gone between the grates and down into the vent. I didn't want to hurt the tree. Bonsai roots can be delicate and are vital to the health of the plant. I didn't want all of this to go to waste. I tried to gently tug it free, but it wouldn't budge. On a closer look, there was a network of pale roots snaking into the darkness of the ductwork. On the one hand, I could just leave it alone, but I want this in the new pot, and I can't have roots growing into the HVAC system. I decided to cut it, and when I did, the roots seemed to recoil, and the detached side fell into the ductwork. That sharp metal taste filled my mouth. And with that taken care of, the rest of the potting went well. The tree was in its new pot with its alabaster roots on display. It was absolutely beautiful. For a day or two, everything seemed fine. I noticed the cut root had grown out of the drainage hole of this new pot. It seemed to be growing toward the air vent again. I moved the pot away from the vent, but the next morning more roots had curved down the sides of the pot, heading in the same direction. I decided to trim these to keep everything in the pot. Overnight, the tree dropped leaves and looked less healthy. I felt guilty. I tried to rationalize that maybe it wasn't getting the ventilation it needed, and this was its way of meeting its needs. From there, little things began to happen that I didn't notice enough to care about. The den started to smell like soil, which I thought was due to the newly exposed roots. Then I started to find dust around the air vents in the house. And last month, my water bill spiked, which I thought was related to a tapping I had been hearing in the walls that my landlord refused to come check out. A couple of days ago, I had people over for a housewarming party. It was the first time most of my friends had seen the place. I cleaned more than I needed to and rotated the bonsai on the side table so that the light hit it just right. The trunk had thickened into this elegant curve, and the exposed roots wrapped over the stone it sat on like pale fingers. The leaves were glossy and dense. It looked like something ancient that I had inherited, and people noticed immediately. "Wait," Emily said, leaning over it with her drink in her hand. "Is this the same tree from your pictures?" "Yeah." "No, it isn't." "It is," I said proudly. "You planted this, 3 months ago?" Something like that." She looked at me like she had caught me in some lie, but that quickly turned to concern. "That's not normal." From the kitchen, somebody said the den smelled like a greenhouse. Someone else said it smelled like pennies. I pretended not to hear that. I haven't smelled anything in weeks. Mark wasn't a bad guy. He just makes mistakes when he is drunk. Toward the end of the night, he crouched in front of the bonsai with a beer in his hand and gave it a serious look. "This is fake," he said. I ignored him. "It looks fake," he said, louder. "That means it's doing well," I said, trying to dismiss him. "You bought a tiny plastic tree and invented a whole personality around it." He reached out and flicked one of the leaves, not hard, just enough to make it move. I stepped toward him before he even realized I was doing it. "Don't." The room went quiet. Mark held up both hands. Sorry. Didn't know you and Bonnie were serious. A few people left. I did too, because I needed him to move on. Then he tipped his beer toward the pot. Banzai! The whole room laughed as a little beer spilled over the rim and darkened the soil. Mark! I scolded automatically. He looked at the pot, then at me. Relax, it's a tree. I feel stupid now, but I was angry. A protective kind of anger, like he had done something to hurt a family member. I got paper towels and dabbed at the soil while everyone moved on. Someone changed the music and the room loosened again. The rest of the night was normal. People drifted between the kitchen, the den, and the back patio. The weather was nice enough now to keep the back door open for a while. I had a cooler outside by the steps because my fridge was full. At some point, I remember Mark announcing he was going out to grab another drink, looking at Bonnie, and asking, Want one, babe? Be right back. He went through the kitchen and out the back door and just didn't come back. Nobody noticed for a while. By midnight, the stragglers began to head out. Emily was the first one to ask, Where's Mark? I said, He's probably left. His car is still here. His car was parked exactly where it had been, under the oak near the curb. His jacket was still hanging over one of my dining chairs. His keys were still in the key box I put out for guests. His phone was on the kitchen island, buzzing every few minutes with messages from the same group chat we were all in. That was when everyone sobered up. We searched the yard with our phone flashlights. We checked everywhere, even the stupid places you check when you know a grown man can't fit, but you check anyway. Someone suggested he got picked up. Someone else said maybe he walked off drunk. Eventually, someone called the police. They came, asked questions, looked around, and took notes. I told them he had gone outside for a beer and never came back. So the search focused outward. By the time everyone left, it was almost 5 a.m. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after the last car pulled away. The bonsai sat in the den where I left it. The soil seemed even darker now than when the beer had been spilled. I let it be and went to bed. I woke up this morning and I found something green growing out of my kitchen sink. At first I thought it was a piece of spinach. When I looked longer, I saw 3 little shoots coming up through the drain. Thin, pale stems with tiny green leaves at the ends. They leaned toward the window over the sink. I touched one with a fork. It bent away from the metal. I dropped the fork into the sink as I jumped backwards. That was when I remembered the card from the box. Do not allow root access beyond pot. I thought that meant the roots might make it harder to repot without damaging the plant. I grabbed the drain cleaner from under the sink, and I poured until the chemical smell burned my nose and the little green shoots disappeared under the liquid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, all at once, pipes knocked all around me, and I thought the house would split in half. A violent and deep metallic banging from inside the wall behind the sink traveled under the floor, then somewhere toward the den. I stepped back as the drain hissed, and the whole counter trembled. Something below me made a low, shifting sound, like furniture being dragged across a room. From the den came a dry rustling of leaves, 1,000 tiny movements layered on top of one another, like the tree was shivering. As quickly as it had started, the house went quiet, and I stood there with the empty bottle in my hand. I thought I had fixed it. I poured boiling water down after it, hoping it would wash out the chemicals from my pipes. I went into the den and saw that the bonsai had outgrown its wire. The training wire I had wrapped so carefully around the trunk to shape it was embedded halfway into the bark. The trunk had thickened around it in minutes. The bark bulged around each turn like a ring around a swollen finger. The leaves looked wet, glossy, and full. New roots had spilled over the side of the pot and touched the floor. One of them had reached the vent again. A new one had stretched in the opposite direction toward the kitchen. I stood in the doorway and tasted metal. I hadn't poisoned it. I fed it. That was when I finally understood what should have been obvious from the beginning. I needed to kill it. I'd only been to the basement a handful of times for the breaker box, but I never took stock of the equipment in the far corner. The familiar smell I had become accustomed to was strong in the basement. As I scanned my flashlight across the room, I did not see any roots or branches. I searched the pile. Just a weed whacker, garden shears, shovel, and a machete. I bent over and took the machete. As I stood up, my eyes caught a thin strand hanging off the ceiling beam. It was one of the innumerable roots that had slithered across the support beams. As I ran my flashlight across the ceiling, I saw that they also followed the pipes, vents, and electrical lines. The entire house had become a trellis for this thing. In the far corner, I noticed 2 thicker root tips hanging limply, different than the rest. When I took a step toward them, I realized they were shoe laces. A shoe hanging from the ceiling by vines. Another step forward, and that shoe was attached to a leg. As I came closer, I was able to see Mark, held in the air by roots. Some roots simply supported him. Others were growing shallow into his skin, still visible like tortuous veins. Large roots weaved through the wall of his chest. His eyes were held open by small tendrils hooked in the corners of his eyelids. 2 thicker roots disappeared into his mouth. Smaller roots followed their path and threaded between his teeth and down his throat. I hoped he was already dead. Then his eyes were pulled towards me and his lips began to move silently under the control of the roots. The roots around his chest tightened, forcing air out of him one word at a time in a raspy, muffled tone. He's almost ready. I swung my machete, trying to cut what was left of Mark's body down, but they recoiled in response, pulling Mark tightly to the ceiling. As they squeezed him tight, a sound of anger came from his body. A thick limb swept the floor and knocked me to the ground. Roots reached down from the ceiling and grabbed my arm to pull me closer to Mark. I used my weapon to free myself. Every cut root leaked the metallic-smelling sap. Some of it fell on my face. It burned. The basement lights flickered and the HVAC began to roar. I needed to get upstairs, and I needed to wash off the sap before it burned too deeply into my skin. The roots chased me into the den. The trunk was twisting and thickening before my eyes. Its branches writhed as the exposed roots spilled over the pot and shot across the floor. Offshoots went into the air vents and covered the doors and windows. The tree itself was still quite small, with its exposed roots now beet red. I ran to the front door, grabbed the knob, and twisted. Nothing. The knob would not turn. I looked down and saw the thin red roots threading through the edge of the door frame. They had grown into the seams. I saw them flex and relax under the paint, like a vein under the skin. I tried to pull harder. The door may have shifted half an inch, just enough for the roots to tighten back the gap. I ran desperately to the back door. Same thing. The kitchen window was my next best bet. I had it open about 2 inches when roots shot out, grabbed it, and slammed it shut with enough force to crack the glass. Then red roots spread across the pane, weaving through the broken glass until there was no opening left. I stopped for a moment, helpless, waiting for the roots to take hold, but nothing. Then there was tapping. One inside the kitchen wall, one beneath the floor in the den, 2 or 3 above me in the ceiling. Back and forth. The taps never seemed to happen at the same time, like they were waiting for the other to finish. Were they communicating or testing something? Maybe they were mapping the house, learning the exits, and closing them. I thought about the pot in the den, the stone with the roots displayed exactly how I wanted them. I thought about how I'd carefully shaped my tree. It was beauty through restraint. I failed to keep the tree contained. It found a bigger pot, and I was in it. Then the walls creaked, the floor under me gave a pop, and in the den, the leaves began to rustle. So, now I'm in my home office. I don't know if I want to slash my way through the window or try my luck at destroying the part of this thing still in the pot. I don't know if that would do any more than anger it, but I think it might be worth a shot. I can still hear the branches and the leaves rustling when I hear the occasional tapping and creaking. Small roots are sweeping their way under the door now, feeling around, exploring the new space. I'm not waiting for them to find me. I'm going to make a run for it and destroy whatever is still in that pot. If you see this post, do not order seeds from any site claiming to have accelerated stock. And if a box arrives without a postmark, do not open it. Do not give it soil. Do not give it water. Do not give it a pot. Do not give it a home.